Dr. Misty here. Thank you so much for joining in on Wellness Wednesday. As always, let's talk today about some health challenges that people of chronic trauma, either developmental trauma or chronic trauma experience. If you are new here, I do a weekly video, and usually the health topics have to do with the subject survivors. And today I asked for questions from my Facebook group, which you can also join, which is Trauma Survivor Health Support. Please join me there if you want some extra, more private help. I asked a survey on what would be the most helpful and what people struggle with the most. And obviously, like, the top answer is PTSD, right? So I really wanted to delve into PTSD, although it may be so obvious for many people what this entails, especially if you're a trauma survivor. For somebody of developmental trauma survivor, it's not as obvious, and there are different types of PTSD. So I wanted to go ahead and just give you a little bit of an overview of that today and how it affects the brain and what parts of the brain are being affected. So you understand, like, you know, there's a lot of shame wrapped around PTSD and complex PTSD, particularly. That's like one of the core ailments of it, is kind of this toxic internalized shame. And so I want to go into that a little bit more and just, you know, just put it out there that if you do have PTSD or complex PTSD and you are a survivor of especially domestic violence or trauma, you know, it is not your fault that you have those brain changes, and your brain made truly amazing adaptations to help you in survival, right? Typically as an adult, though, we want to now get out of those survival mechanisms, and that can be really challenging because our brain is literally formed differently than an average person. So somebody without living in a complex, you know, a chronically abusive home, or in a, you know, a very impoverished area, things like that. So let's go into that a little bit today. Okay. If you guys have questions, please comment below or click that love button if you can relate to this. Okay. So many people right now, I know this week has been really hard for me in particular, being home and having certain triggers, specific triggers happen at home with kids. Having kids is very triggering with somebody with PTSD, just because of noise stimulation, things like that. And especially if you have younger kids, like things like breastfeeding or anything like that can be very triggering to a survivor. So let's go into this a little bit. So there are two different types of PTSD. There is traditional PTSD, which is usually 1 or 2 moments of severe trauma that a patient has experienced. And typically those symptoms come along with flashbacks. Okay, usually some sort of visual flashback. Those are the most common. You know, this is more of a incident of a car accident, an incident of a scary health situation, a hospitalization, you know, being in a city and held up at gunpoint or something like that. My apologies for this being triggering to anybody. There is a trigger warning to this video, by the way. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff, you know, a war veteran, especially as an adult, can get PTSD being overseas and seeing, you know, scary, horrific things, people dying in front of them. You know, that's a very, and it's not to diminish general PTSD or put one before the other. They're just different in nature. Okay, so somebody with PTSD will have a triggering of specific types of events that will bring back memories as if the person is reliving that memory in the moment. Okay, so that can be very scary for people around, as well as the person who's having the flashback. That person needs to know how to feel safe and ground themselves. So that's in general, typical PTSD has to do with, visual flashbacks, heart rate, nightmares, like kind of reliving that event over and over kind of thing. Okay. So complex PTSD is different. Okay. Complex PTSD comes with a prolonged amount of stress or domestic violence and abuse. Okay. So if this is somebody who had, a substance abuse parent, or somebody like drug addiction, things like that. This could be somebody who has had sexual abuse, physical abuse, chronic verbal or psychological abuse as well. People who have families or had an upbringing, in a foster care system or something, of people with some sort of personality or cluster B type of personality disorder, where they, there was a lot of manipulation, creating a lot of stress and confusion and dissociation for a child. And or just chronic abuse. This typically comes up more in people who've had more along the lines of sexual abuse, and specifically more for people who are young and developing. Okay, so complex PTSD would be more of like a developmental type of PTSD, because you are growing in an environment that requires you to have a survival type of brain. Okay. And so what the difference there is that you can have 3 different types of flashbacks. It's not just a visual flashback. And this is the part that's really confusing to survivors. And this is a part that took me like forever to understand. So I just want to make sure that I want to clarify like some of the top points to help you understand yourself and what you might be experiencing, especially right now in quarantine. Okay. Quarantine and everything going on with COVID, with all the restrictions, it can almost trigger a sense like restrictions in being home. If you grew up in a chronically developmentally stressful situation, that's going to trigger feelings of trapped and helplessness. Okay. So that is called an emotional flashback. So you might actually be having emotional flashbacks where you're not necessarily having a visual memory pop up. You're not having the specific thing completely like get to you, you're thinking of like a war veteran with PTSD. I had actually a professor, a teacher in high school that had it from being in war, and they were doing drilling outside the window. And one day he told us a story about it. It was pretty awesome, like how vulnerable he was about it. And he had a really great sense of humor about it. But he would say like, I gotta be careful with certain noises and stuff, because man, somebody was drilling outside my window one day and I just was like, down, he yelled and he got down for cover because he thought it was like gunshots because he had a flashback, right? That's not necessarily what's going to happen with somebody who has a complex PTSD. Complex PTSD can trigger emotional flashbacks. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a visual of what happened. It could be triggering an emotional state and state of your brain that you are that you've had in the past and how you felt. Okay, there can also be a somatic flashbacks, so body memories. People talk about like body memories. So this is particularly important for people with sexual abuse or dissociated sexual abuse, where they have amnesia, things like that. I can talk about this more freely now because of the amount of trauma that I've done, but and one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this and helping other people, because I truly understand the levels of complexity that this affects your psyche as well as your body and your health, you know. So, you know, victims of sexual abuse or developmental sexual abuse specifically, or chronic sexual abuse, will have a lot more, or physical abuse also, they will have a lot more somatic flashbacks, which are body memories. This is very common with, again, mothers who are breastfeeding, any specific types of touch. You might not have a memory or understand, but you might just like jerk really quick and not understand like what your body is doing. You know, so it's more of like a sensation, like your nervous system has memory. Okay. So even if you don't remember the specific event, your body does remember. A great book and reference for that actually is The Body Keeps the Score. That is an amazing book for people who are just kind of, especially if you're, you know, you have kids and you don't have good, the best health, and you're trying to understand like memories that are coming back because your kids are triggering memories of things coming back to you. That's an awesome book to read. It's extremely validating, and it's very helpful to understand the types of flashbacks that come with complex PTSD. Okay, so the other parts of complex PTSD, and again, it's usually for more of people with domestic violence situations, is there's levels of like toxic shame. There's can be levels of what's called dissociation, which is when a patient will kind of space out. If it's basically like if you are in a situation or a person is in a position, I'm trying to talk about this without being triggered myself, my apologies. If you are in a position of no perceived way out, your body will create a way out for you to not experience the pain, which is dissociation, whether you block it, right? You block it out, put it in the back of your mind. Dissociative amnesia, you can, you know, some people on the extreme levels end up with, you know, dissociative identity disorder or things that are extremely severe. But the average person, unless you've had, again, trigger warning here with more severe abuse cases, people, you know, who have, like, it's so sad, this, you know, this is the world we live in, but people of trafficking, things like that, who've had developmental trauma, you know, these people are struggling more with feeling safe within their body, and they're having, your body can actually feel like a war zone when you are somebody like that, because you have so much triggering of your nervous system, and you were not safe no matter where, like you were trapped in a specific situation. So there was no perceived safety. So your being in your body mentally was unsafe. So there's levels of how this affects people. So complex PTSD, that can be, there can be very small levels of that. There's kind of like a large scale there. There can be multiple different types of dissociation as well, and different types of anxiety. And then that level of like toxic shame can be in there too. So what this does, and I want to show you on, I'm going to share my screen with you. I want to show you in the brain why some of this stuff is happening and how amazing our body is, really, that, like, you know, your body can remember certain things that created a traumatic experience for you. So it's going to remind you, it's almost like your hand touching a stove, right? Like your body, you touch the stove once and you're like, that freaking hurt. Like, I'm not going to do that again, right? So your body remembers that, and your body remembers, don't do that, right? That doesn't feel good. So it's very similar, like the way that your body processes specific types of memories as well. So I'm going to share my screen really quick here. Here we go. Okay, so this is an excellent photo. I think it was from like the Willow Library. It's like a psychiatric journal that shows this is the brain. This shows an awesome loop that has stimulation of certain parts of the brain and then hormones, and how this can actually create a lot of problems with immunity as well as pain and things like that. This is really cool. So in complex PTSD, not necessarily PTSD, okay, but complex PTSD in patients with severe domestic violence, you know, those types of situation or entrapment, you are going to get a decreased hippocampus here, okay? You're going to get your amygdala decrease, and then your prefrontal cortex is going to decrease, okay? And so what these areas do are regulation of stress and memory. So this will actually, the hippocampus will actually create, and the amygdala will create distorted memories. This is why it's so hard for a trauma survivor to remember things clearly, or if you have like a memory of flashes and things like that, it's because normal memory storage is not happening in traumatic memories. It's important to understand that. Okay, so what's happening to these patients is their prefrontal cortex is shrinking. Okay, their hippocampus is shrinking. Their amygdala is working overtime and overstimulated, okay, because of the chronic stress response and survival response, right? So what is happening to your body during this time? Okay, and this is one of the reasons, this is like an excellent wrap-up video for anybody with chronic trauma to understand how it is affecting your brain and your health, okay? So these parts of your brain, it's important to also understand that, you know, if you think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, our basic needs need to be met, and emotional needs need to be met in order for development to happen with a child. If a child is severely neglected or abused, you know, the child will go into severe brain changes and they will adapt to that. Okay. And so really, like, your body is more wired for survival versus thriving. Okay. Survival versus thriving, because the main part of what you were taught and the environment that you adapted to was to survive. Okay, so if you were somebody who had severe neglect, or you did not have enough food, water, shelter, you know, you didn't have those basic needs met, or you didn't have good, strong, secure attachments, your body is going to be more in survival mode, trying to figure out how to help yourself, okay, and keep safe. And so the parts that have a lot more of the development, typically your hippocampus is not going to be, is going to be bigger. Okay. It's essentially, and then your prefrontal cortex shrinks a lot here. And the reason for that is it's not growing as much, right? The parts that are wired for stress are the parts that, are wired for development are not as much. Okay, so prefrontal cortex is more in front here. That's higher levels of thinking. So you know, working on emotional regulation, decisions, things like that. This is why a lot of times, like this will create a lot of problems with depression, brain fog, and chronic trauma survivors, because those are the areas of the brain that your body needs to be using in order to do day-to-day things, make decisions, you know, function, right? So if your brain is wired this way and this shrinks, you're going to have a lot harder of a time with that kind of stuff. You're more prone to difficulties with depression and anxiety. So what's happening here is that Also your hypothalamus, which is part of your endocrine system, okay, your hormones, your adrenals. When you get stressed, you're basically getting pinged in these areas, okay? The hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus, okay? And what your body does is it releases corticotropin releasing hormone, okay? It stimulates the hypothalamus here to release that, okay? It basically means that your the adrenal cortex increases cortisol, okay? Increase in cortisol should help over time to manage your inflammation markers. It's interesting that here, so we're seeing that this is other types of stress hormones. This will affect our immune cells, okay? So this will have a direct effect on our immune cells. Our immune cells go down. It will also trigger pro-inflammatory cells. So there's all different types of immunity. This will increase inflammation, right? In PTSD, our body, typically cortisol in the regular realm will be, our stress response will be, okay, corticotropic releasing hormone, no problem. Stress hormone, this is fight or flight, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, okay, got it. Okay, our cortisol goes up and we use our, our heart rate goes up, our blood sugar goes up, all that kind of stuff. And our immune cells are activated, okay? In patients with PTSD, typically your cortisol levels are not, you've been using so much and too much of a response, and because this is shrunk, it's gonna go down. It's gonna go down. So your body is not having as much ability to regulate your immunity, and it's not going to have the ability to regulate your inflammation levels. Okay, cortisol directly links to inflammation. This can also link to neuroinflammation. These are the types of cells in the brain. Okay, so this is a little bit more confusing, but it's really amazing how like an average person can have a stress response, but because part of there's two things going on. Part of the aspect of like adrenal fatigue and chronic exhaustion is like the body's ability to, if you are chronically in a stress state, your body's ability to produce cortisol is not, eventually gets less and less and less, okay? If you are chronically stressed out. So that is really important. That's a big part also of adrenal issues, is understanding that this is part of what's called the HPA axis. And so your body is going to adapt to that. If you are seriously getting chronically pinged for stress, your body is going to say like either, hey, we're not going to release as much, or we've already like, we're doing the best we can here, and there's just not like, we don't have it, right? So I hope that's a little more in depth, but I just wanted to share that with you guys, so you understood how specifically PTSD affects the brain and affects our health. People with high ACE scores, which is adverse childhood experiences, there are such bigger risks. If you have a higher ACE score than 4, your risks for heart disease, depression, anxiety, autoimmunity, like so many different things skyrocket, okay? And part of that is because of the changes in your brain, in your body, that you've had to make through adaptations to being in a survival type mode for a long time, right? So your body, so you have to work to help yourself overcome that as an adult. And it's not necessarily impossible. Okay, but giving yourself the permission to take off your back that fault of it being your fault and like the shame of it being PTSD, like your body did the best it could, and so did your brain, right? So now that you're out of the stressful environment, which hopefully you are, and if you are not, please seek some support or help to get yourself in a safer environment, okay? But typically as an adult, hopefully you are in a safe environment, okay? And so your body, it's just relearning those and learning in general, how to create safety with complex PTSD within your body and your environment, and consistent messages to your nervous system that you are safe, everything is okay. That's a big piece of it in overcoming some of this. So things that you can do to help yourself during this time, if you are getting things like emotional flashbacks from being home or feeling like that trapped sensation, from things with quarantine, okay? One of the things that I would highly recommend is some form of movement and exercise. So exercise will help to increase the prefrontal cortex. It will absolutely help. It will also help to balance your hormones and your stress levels. So that is very important. Now, whether you are doing that in nature, which I highly, highly suggest, exercising in nature is like one of the top things I would suggest for somebody. And if you are feeling too sick to be like going for a run or anything, even if you literally got out in nature, it would be helpful without even exercising, okay? Because of the grounding effects that it has and the fresh air and the oxygen, as well as the vitamin D and the sunlight. That's going to help with depression, okay? But just getting out and getting exercise is very helpful, okay? The other thing that is really helpful is to use your creative brain, okay? So doing things to help yourself. Now, this may be coping mechanisms of, I like to use painting. I also like to do baking. Doing a lot of like paleo baking with gluten and dairy free is great. If you can reduce sugar and dyes and things like that, that's going to be really helpful in general, with not kicking up your body's natural kind of anxious state, okay? But doing things that get you in a creative state of mind, okay? That's really important. Sometimes I even color with my kids, you know, get out the box of crayons, we're going to make a craft. Cool, let's make a craft together. You know, think of things that you can do that are creative. Sometimes this is music. Music therapy is an excellent way to manage and keep your stress levels down, okay? Anything that you can do to decrease your trigger responses as well as increase your safety internally and externally, and increase that prefrontal cortex while you're doing that. The other thing could be using your non-dominant hand. That's really a cool thing that you can do to create more of different neural pathways. Or switching up furniture in your house. That will help with the creativity aspect as well as the neurological aspect. It will build new neural circuitry in your brain to help you, okay? So you'll be less on autopilot as you are you know, trying to get used to and accustomed and thinking a little bit more, okay? So those are some things that you can help for coping mechanisms on that realm. Some things that you can do to help with your cortisol levels, as well as your you know, your health and your stress responses. Licorice root can be really powerful. Ashwagandha is really helpful with managing hormone levels. Sometimes the licorice root can help with deglycerated licorice, if possible, can help with some of the breakdown of cortisol. So it'll keep whatever cortisol you're making, you know, it'll slowly break it down versus you having it break down all the time. So little tips like that can be really powerful in your healing journey. And things like journaling and doing, workbooks. There's also a lot of great workbooks out there with PTSD and helping yourself get through the process. But if you are somebody who has PTSD, or you might not know you have PTSD, but a lot of the stuff I'm saying sounds pretty familiar and you're going to go look into it, there is a lot of help out there. Okay, and there's a lot of things that you can do. And if you are somebody who is looking for more help, you're not alone. The other thing I want to just say really quick is you're not alone in the fact that if you're being triggered right now by this situation. I think a lot of people are, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing such a heightened emotional state. You know what I mean? Like that level of feeling out of control is hard, and it's scary to a lot of people. So some people might have a fight response, right? Some people might have a flight response and an anxious response. Some people might have a freeze response, and some people might have a fawn response, which is kind of like that pleasing response in trying to just make it better, right? So you're not alone if you are having those responses. It's just self-care is very important. Please know that self-care is got to be up there on your priority list. Okay, so if you have an abundance of health issues to add on to that, you are having adrenal exhaustion, you feel like your hormones are off, you're having insomnia, you're having gut issues, you feel like you're chronically inflamed, you're just like your body is not feeling well. I do a free discovery call for people who are serious about wanting to get themselves well and feel better from the, not just PTSD, but also from the chronic health issues that is caused by some of these things. I do a free discovery call. You can schedule that on www.drmisty.com. It's a 15-minute call, and it's basically to know if I can be of help to you or not, or how, what direction I can point you in if I can't be of help to you. But really, it's to guide you in, what might be going on with your body, and let me see if I can help with this area. I can tell you, again, from personal experience, that functional medicine has changed my life. More than likely saved it in some ways from the path I was going down with my autoimmune conditions and the multitude of things that I thought were just, not, I didn't know what they were before, before I figured out I had, chronic fatigue and fibro and all the underlying things that create those types of symptoms. So I'm happy to help anybody who is interested in getting themselves to feel better and getting to some of the real roots there that are created from being in a chronic stress situation. If you are interested in a virtual consultation, you can also just directly book a virtual consultation. And if this was helpful for you today, please share with your friends, click that love button, or comment below on what was helpful for you, so I know on what to put in my next videos. Again, this is something I'm very, very passionate about. My heart is with the survivors out there who are struggling with their health in their lives. And, my mission is truly to help those who are suffering, to help bring thriving into their life, maybe for the first time, and to help you to, get your health back in order. So I'm here for that. A lot of times people who do book those calls are people who might have had this history of trauma, but also had so many people just tell them they don't know what's wrong because their tests are all fine. So if that's you and you want extra help, I'm definitely here for you for that. Let's get you the help that you deserve. And I'll see you guys on next week's video. Thanks so much for watching. And again, I'm Dr. Misty Kosciuszko. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks for joining in on Wellness Wednesday.